As an indigenous African American, the European education system has historically propagated a narrow narrative, one filled with distortions and omissions. It fixates on the myths surrounding figures like Christopher Columbus, the tragedy of the Trail of Tears endured by the Native Americans, the sanitized tale of the Pilgrims, and the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. Yet amidst these skewed accounts, there's a profound imperative for us to reclaim our own history, to know thyself, and to narrate our own story. This video reveals the untold story of slavery as we uncover the whitewashed narratives that have obscured the true extent of its horrors. From the Barbary slave trade to the transatlantic slave trade, learn how historical records have been manipulated to downplay the role of European powers and perpetuate myths of superiority. Join me as we confront uncomfortable truths and challenge the prevailing narratives that have shaped our understanding of one of humanity's darkest chapters. It is time to reckon with the past and pave the way for a more inclusive and accurate portrayal of history. Watch now to uncover the hidden truths behind the whitewashed history of slavery. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, these iconic words resonate in the United States Marine Corps' hymn, marking two pivotal moments in Marine Corps history. But what deep, dark secret lies behind the shores of Tripoli, and why is it immortalized in song? The halls of Montezuma evoke memories of the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 48. It was a conflict that tested the mettle of the young Marine Corps as they fought bravely in battles across Mexican territories. The outcome of the Mexican-American War emerged from tensions surrounding the United States annexation of Texas in 1845. Mexico asserted it ended at the Nueces River, while the United States claimed it extended to the Rio Grande. Marked by consistent victories for U.S. forces, the war concluded with the United States gaining control over 500,000 square miles of Mexican territory, stretching from the Rio Grande to the Pacific Ocean in the west. The war was a hostile takeover of land. Now we know the war started in Montezuma, which is Mexico, over land. But what about Tripoli? The Tripoli mentioned in the hymn is the ancient city in present-day Libya. Its inclusion in the hymn refers to a different chapter in Marine Corps history, the battle against the Barbary pirates. It reveals a distinct episode in Marine Corps and African history. The mention of Tripoli alludes to the conflict with the Barbary pirates who plagued the Mediterranean and European coastlines. Tripoli served as a focal point for these skirmishes. This chapter emerged from piracy and extortion by the Barbary states, prompting the United States, along with its naval forces and Marines, to engage in battles to combat this menace. Ultimately, through treaties and military actions, the United States asserted its power, securing freedom of navigation in the Mediterranean and marking a significant chapter in Marine Corps legacy. Who were the Barbary pirates? The Barbary pirates were North Africans who were a notorious threat, terrorizing the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and parts of Europe. They were a formidable threat for centuries. The Barbary pirates originate primarily from the Barbary states of North Africa, including regions such as present-day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. These pirates caused significant harm to Europeans due to their relentless attacks on merchant ships, coastal towns, and even capturing Europeans for ransom and enslavement. Motivated by a combination of economic gain, religious fervor, and political power, the Barbary pirates exploited weak maritime defenses and engaged in piracy, extortion, and slave trading of Europeans. The women captured were sold or traded as sex slaves, and some later became concubines. These pirates were active from the 16th to the early 19th century, and they posed a significant threat to maritime trade in the Mediterranean Sea and beyond. The term Barbary pirate generally refers to the corsairs and the privateers who operated from ports along the Barbary Coast, which included North Africa. Their actions disrupted trade routes, destabilized economies, and instilled fear across the Mediterranean region and beyond, leaving a lasting legacy of piracy and conflict in maritime history. The Barbary pirate slave trade coincided with the transatlantic slave trade, yet its prominence has been obscured and overlooked in European historical narratives. Similarly, American and European educational institutions have often omitted this chapter from their curricula, perpetuating a narrative that conceals the extent of the Barbary slavery and spreads the false narrative of world history. To understand the transatlantic slave trade, we must acknowledge and understand the Barbary pirate slave trade and the history of slavery in the Mediterranean basin. Slavery, a deep-rooted institution since ancient times, saw individuals from various regions of the Roman Empire subjected to servitude and slavery by Africans and Arabs. This historical context sheds light on the motivations and practices of the Barbary pirates, whose actions maintained the brutal trade and exploitation of European descendants across the Mediterranean and beyond. Empires throughout history have risen and fallen for various reasons, often driven by factors such as military conquest, economic prowess, or internal strife. Despite these shifts in power, slavery endured as a pervasive institution, with wealthy individuals and raiders alike profiting from the trade in human lives. The Barbary states, situated along the North African coast, emerged as a focal point for piracy and slavery, fueled by a combination of economic incentives, geopolitical dynamics, and societal norms. These states became notorious hotbeds of exploitation, perpetuating the cycle of human bondage and contributing to the broader narrative of maritime piracy in the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire extended their dominion along the North African coast with limited control over the Barbary Coast. Despite this nominal authority, the region became a fertile ground for piracy to flourish, contributing to the rise of maritime lawlessness and the consistent emergence of the infamous Barbary pirates. European mercenaries were adventurers drawn to conflicts and opportunities across different regions, akin to modern day hired soldiers. These individuals sought wealth, adventure, and employment in various military campaigns, often offering their services to the highest bidder regardless of nationality or cause. An intriguing aspect of the Barbary pirates' history is the composition of their ranks, with a significant number of them now being Europeans rather than the native to the North African region. These individuals, resembling mercenaries in their pursuit of adventure and wealth, ventured into piracy along the Barbary Coast. However, their activities were marked by a grim reality. The primary focus of many of these pirates was the capture and sale of fellow human beings into slavery. This stark contrast between their motives for piracy and the cruel exploitation of others underscores the complexity and darkness of their trade. Europeans worked with the Barbary pirates to enslave other Europeans for monetary gain. They essentially switched sides for wealth. The engagements waged by the Marine Corps and the United States Navy against the Barbary pirates transcended mere protection of American interest. They were pivotal moments in the fight against the egregious trade in human lives. These battles were not only about safeguarding maritime commerce and securing freedom of navigation, but also about confronting the grave injustice of European slavery. The Barbary pirates' relentless pursuit of profit through the capture and sale of fellow human beings into bondage was a moral affront that demanded a resolute response from the United States and its naval forces. At the heart of the conflict with the Barbary pirates lay a fundamental principle: the inherent dignity and worth of every European. The actions undertaken by the Marine Corps and the United States Navy were not solely driven by strategic objectives or geopolitical considerations, but also by a profound sense of moral duty to oppose the practice of the European slave trade. Through their courage and determination, these forces not only defended American interests, but also upheld the universal values of freedom and human rights for all Europeans, leaving a legacy in the archives of maritime history. The iconic lyrics "From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli" resonates as a tribute to the courage and sacrifice of those who confronted tyranny and oppression, whether on the battlefield or the high seas, whether battling in the Mexican-American War or facing the Barbary pirates in North Africa. The deeds of these warriors are immortalized in the stirring verses of the United States Marine Corps hymn. Thus, the hymn serves as a powerful reminder of the enduring spirit of those who defended liberty and upheld the noble ideas of democracy and human dignity. As a people, we should now clearly understand the impact of the Barbary slave trade to the transatlantic slave trade. The Barbary slave trade has indeed reverberated through history, contributing to systemic disparities and injustices that persist in Europe, United Kingdom, and the United States. While those affected by the Barbary slave trade did not receive direct reparations, the consequences of their exploitation have been profound and multifaceted. One aspect is the replacement of European captives with African slaves, perpetuating the dehumanization and commodification of human lives. This practice entrenched racial hierarchies and perpetuated systems of oppression. Furthermore, the legacy of violence and exploitation has manifested in the form of massacres and atrocities committed against African communities, both historically and in contemporary times. These acts of violence have exacerbated racial tensions and entrenched inequalities. The denial of education, the disruption of family dynamics, and cultural practices have served to further marginalize and disempower communities of African descent by depriving individuals of educational opportunities and eroding cultural heritage. These actions have hindered social mobility and perpetuated cycles of poverty and marginalization. Overall, the disparities embedded within the current systems of Europe, the United Kingdom, and the United States are deeply rooted in the historical legacy of the Barbary slave trade and other forms of exploitation and oppression. Addressing these disparities requires a concerted effort to dismantle systemic racism and inequality, and to acknowledge and redress the historical injustices inflicted upon marginalized communities. From the shores of Tripoli to the halls of Montezuma, these iconic opening lines from the United States Marine Corps pay homage to two significant battles in Marine Corps history. The reference to Tripoli, now the largest city in Libya, recalls the fierce engagements fought against the Barbary pirates. These pirates, who plagued the North African coast, the Mediterranean Sea, and European shores for centuries, were notorious for their brutal raids and slave trading activities. The practice of slavery had deep roots in the Mediterranean basin, stretching back to ancient times. Various people from across the Roman Empire, including the Franks, Germans, Slavs, Greeks, Balkan inhabitants, Africans, and Jews, were subjected to enslavement. Wealthy individuals in Rome, as well as subsequent Gothic and Arab empires, amassed fortunes through the slave trade. Even Viking raiders profited from capturing and trading slaves. Slavery remained prevalent in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East until relatively recent periods. Historically, there has always been a rise and a fall of a great nation. The Barbary states fell purportedly under Ottoman Empire control during the 16th century expansion. However, due to geographical distance and the fiercely independent nature of the Berbers and other coastal inhabitants, Ottoman authority was often minimal. The Barbary pirates, many of whom were not indigenous to the region but hailed from Europe, operated akin to mercenaries seeking adventure and profit primarily through the trade of other Europeans being sold into slavery. European history presents a skewed perspective, often overlooking the experiences and contributions of indigenous peoples. As descendants of indigenous cultures, it's essential to reject this biased narrative and reclaim our own stories. Just as history is dynamic and ever evolving, so too must our understanding and representation of indigenous heritage evolve to reflect the full richness and complexity of our collective experiences. The transatlantic slave trade was not the first slave trade. In fact, there were many nationalities enslaved.